Good evening. Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings upon everyone. If you're all girls in the audience, then I would have said Happy Valentine's, but you're not. My wife's going to be a bit upset that I'm not there giving her a red rose tonight, but hey, military chaplaincy is more important. You didn't record that, did you? Okay. I've been tasked to talk about this topic, and usually attracts a lot of controversy, debate, discussion. Wherever I go, I have to sort of end up having a long discussion about this issue, about military chaplaincy, and then sort of working in the military. So that's good, because that's why we're here. We're here to debate. It's good to have a good dialogue. It's good to have a good discussion. But what I want to, I guess, make clear is that I'm not necessarily a spokesperson for the government or for the military or for the MOD, nor am I here to sort of justify necessarily what they do or how they do it. I'm a chaplain in the military, and I've got some experience, and I'm here to sort of share that experience with you and see if we can explore some of the topics surrounding this issue. I have been, as Dr. Andrew mentioned, in the military for 6.5 years. I was the first, and I'm still the only one, and so that has allowed me to sort of pick up some perspective on this issue. So I look forward to sharing that with you. And you'll be sort of interested to know that there weren't a huge number of imams lining up to take this job. So when I came out from the interview and I looked around to see if anybody else was there for the interview, well, I couldn't see anybody. Just to give you a perspective to some of the things. Actually, there were other people, but not as many as you would expect, considering that when one imam has something, wants to do something, all imams want to do it. So in that situation, to come out of the interview room and find that I was the only person there was quite surprising. Sorry, before I go ahead, I really want to thank Dr. Sophie and Dr. Andrew, the Center for the Study of Islamic Studies, and also the Chaplaincy Center in Cardiff, for inviting me here today. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot. One thing I'd like to also mention is that I'm a civilian military chaplain, which is a contradiction in itself. That how can you be civilian and be military as well? But what that means is that I don't wear a uniform. And there were several reasons as to why that was the case, but I think I'll come to that later on. But what it also means is that I don't necessarily fit into the chain of command or within the military chain of command the way established chaplains or Christian chaplains do. This is not because we wanted to have a different setup for Muslims and a different setup for Christians, but that is the way the situation was, and that's why we had to go down that route, and I'll explain that a little bit more later. Having said that, as Dr. Andrew said, I have been to Afghanistan several times. I've spent altogether nearly 3 months there, and there are also discussions currently about me going out again soon. Having said that, I'm actually a very strong advocate of any future imams serving the Muslim community in the military to come into uniform. And there is a lot of debate on both sides, both the Muslim side and the established chaplaincy side, as to if that will be a good move or not. But personally, I think having all chaplains of all faiths in uniform, I think will be a good move towards integrating people of all faiths into chaplaincy, military chaplaincy system and setup. So, what I want to do over the next 40 minutes or so, as I've been very kindly reminded several times, is to discuss some of these issues that you see on the screen. A personal account, my journey into military chaplaincy, what was it and what were the experiences? What is the role of a military chaplain? What does he or she actually do? And then looking at some of the statistics, how many Muslims are serving in the military, where are they serving, and why did they join? And lastly, some insight and some discussion on Muslims serving in the military, the issues surrounding Muslims serving in the British military, and maybe an Islamic perspective to that, as best as I can. I'm not necessarily expert on that issue, but I will try to discuss that from the experience that I've gained. So moving on quite quickly, every now and then I'll bring some pictures up which will give you a break from looking at my face, I guess. In the top picture you see a Marine. He is a Royal Marine. He's the only Muslim to serve in the Royal Marines at the moment. And that's at the Eid gathering. Below you see a warrant officer and a Lance Corporal and his wife talking to the head of the armed forces at the Armed Forces Eid gathering. There's the famous picture with the, which the Cardiff Centre of Islamic Studies has been publishing everywhere. This is on an exercise where I went to meet a group of soldiers who were training. Well, actually they were in their basic training. And below you see the head of the armed forces was presented this painting by a captain in the army who painted this himself and presented it to the head of the armed forces. And those people who can probably make out the Arabic, it says Hubbul Watan min al Iman, which means that the love of the nation is part of your faith, it's from faith. And that was presented to the head of the armed forces, and those people who are familiar with the military will realize that the shape of the Arabic is actually shaped in the cap badge of the regiment that the head of the armed forces is from. And that was very cleverly given to the head of the armed forces. And there you go, there's a picture of Muslims who are serving in the military, very proud to wear their uniform, with their families, with the head of the armed forces, celebrating Eid a couple of years ago. So, just a basic outline of how I came to take on this job. As Dr. Andrew mentioned, I was the Muslim chaplain to Wandsworth Prison. One day I was sitting at my desk looking through the Muslim news, and I saw this advertisement of a Muslim chaplain in the armed forces, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting. I've done Wandsworth Prison now, I was thrown in the deep end. It wasn't deep enough, let's try something else. So I decided to think about the job for a few days, thinking, is this something that I want to do? Is this something I can do? Is this something that a Muslim should do? And then after a few days, I picked up the phone and I ordered the application form. That sat on my desk for another few days. When it arrived, again, just battling with myself, thinking about if this is something that is worthwhile doing. Anyway, in the end, I went to some of my peers, some of my Muslim colleagues, and I said, guys, there's this job that's come up, and I think, we should apply, because, the people who've already served in the public institutions are best placed to serve in this job, because they know how, particularly in the prison service, know how uniform works, how command and control works, what security is, and are able to strike a good balance between the faith, the needs of the faith, and the needs of the organization. But the answer I got was, no way, you can't work for the armed forces. And I said, well, why not? Well, you just can't. You can't work for the armed forces. And I said, what's the reason? Well, they're killing Muslims in Iraq and Afghanistan, so you can't work for the armed forces. And I said, well, you're working for Her Majesty's Prison Service, so why can't you work for Her Majesty's Forces? At the end of the day, it's the same employer. No, you're going to have to condone the killing of Muslims, you're going to have to support people who are going out to kill Muslims, and therefore you can't join the armed forces. And I thought, I'll do what I always do, be a rebel, and actually apply for the post. So that actually made me more determined to apply, because I couldn't see the logic behind this. If you can provide a chaplaincy service to criminals in the prison service, then why can't you provide a chaplaincy service to professional military personnel who are in the armed forces? And at the end of the day, they are Muslim, they are serving in the armed forces, and they are entitled to the same spiritual, pastoral, and religious support as all other people are. And so when I realized that those people who are actually capable of doing this job, who are best placed to do this job, weren't applying, I felt a sense of duty to apply, because I felt, as Dr. Andrew has said, though I didn't realize it then, that it became a very public post, and what we needed was someone who was able to manage those those issues and manage those challenges. Not that I'm saying I was a really good person to do it. I'm not boasting, I hope. But I felt that the experience that God had given me in the prison service, it was important that I used it to transfer into another place. And so I applied and left the rest to God. And they offered me the job, and I was just stupid enough to accept. So I accepted the post, and here I am 6.5 years later. And I also realized that at the end of the day, people serving in the armed forces are human beings, just as anybody who's in the NHS or in the prison service, and they require the same support as anybody else. And being the Muslim chaplain to the armed forces was not about condoning or condemning any action that the military is asked to carry out on behalf of the nation or on behalf of the government. It was actually the job was actually there to serve Muslims and, in a sense, provide an Islamic service to the Muslims who are serving in the military. And what I also realized actually is that the Prophet ﷺ also provided pastoral support to his soldiers. He was not only a commander, he was not only a commander-in-chief for the people he took to battle, he was also a pastor for them, he was also a spiritual guide for them, and he was also a moral compass for them. And therefore, I felt if the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, can engage with people who are ultimately asked to either pay the ultimate price or to take a life, then there should be no controversy in actually me doing this particular role too. But once I got the job and accepted it, the response I got was mixed, but more negative than positive. So I can remember it was in Ramadan in 2005 that I started this job, and I can remember after Salatul Tarawih leaving the masjid with one of my Imam friends, and I told him along the way that, look, I've been offered this job and I've accepted it and I'm starting next week. And he stopped and he said, you what? I said, I'm doing the job Muslim Chaplain to the Armed Forces. And he goes, disaster, as if I'd sold my soul to the devil. So, it wasn't a very good response. I once went to a conference and I bumped into another Imam, and he said to me, do you know what, I don't want to undermine what you're doing, but I really feel sorry for you. And I said, why? And he said, well, you work in a very hostile environment. You work with people who are there to kill other people. And I said, well, yes and no. Actually, I've not experienced any hostility or aggression or intimidation from people who are serving in the military. But you're right, they are there ultimately, if required, to kill. And the main thing here is that they are trained to kill. They're not necessarily there to kill someone at their own whim or at their own desire. They are instructed to kill and commanded to kill with a set of rules and regulations which they adhere to. And actually, it's because of them and because of the role that they have within this country that you are basically able to sleep very comfortably in your home. Had UK not had a very strong army or a military, then we would constantly be in fear of being invaded. I mean, suppose the French decided to invade us. I mean, who's going to protect us? I don't want to end up speaking French. But, it's the military as an organization that supports the government to allow us to be the people that we are in this country, whether we see it or not, whether we realize it or not. That is something that I've picked up as I've done this job over the past few years. I went to another conference and I presented to about 100 imams about my role in the armed forces, and one guy stood up and said, how do you sort of reconcile the fact that you're providing support to those people who will ultimately kill other people. And I said, where do you work? And he said, I work in the prison service. And I said, well, how do you reconcile the fact that you will be providing support to rapists, pedophiles, murderers, robbers, you name it, all the people that will come have been committed of a crime. I mean, how do you have been convicted of a crime? So how do you reconcile that? I mean, so I find it actually more easier to reconcile the fact that I'm providing support to professionals who are not murderers, who will bear the weapon and shoot it when the need be. What really hurt me the most was about 6 months ago when I spoke to another imam, and it's interestingly that all these responses have come from imams. After a 1 hour discussion or 45-minute discussion, he said to me, Asim, you better repent. He said, you know that one day you're going to have to stand before God. And I said, well, I hope you'll be standing next to me. But these are some of the responses that I had and some of the moral dilemmas that I went through as I took on the role and began to exercise my role as Muslim chaplain in the armed forces. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been 6.5 years. I haven't looked back. I think this role has enhanced my spirituality and my faith rather than diminished it. It's allowed me to see the armed forces from the inside and the way it operates. And it's allowed me to tackle issues which I wouldn't have been able to tackle anywhere else. I mean, real issues that a lot of us don't necessarily come face to face with in our day-to-day life. Quickly moving on, because I've already taken. And over the past 6.5 years, I've traveled to Afghanistan, I've traveled to the Falkland Islands, I travel regularly to various parts of Europe. I've been able to teach and train thousands of military personnel before they deploy to Muslim countries. And when I went to Afghanistan, I was an advisor for the US and UK commanders on how they should best engage religious leaders and religious institutions in Afghanistan to be able to bring about stability, peace and reconciliation in that country. So there's opportunity to speak to military personnel about faith. Over here, once a year, I gather as many Muslims as I can in the armed forces, and we have what we call the Armed Forces Muslim Spiritual and Moral Development course. And so we've got, that is a picture from the last conference that we had in October 2011. The top picture is when the head of the Armed Forces actually gave me my Operational Service Medal, which is the medal that you receive for serving in an operational environment when you actually, it's the same medal that soldiers would get for serving in Afghanistan. And so I was presented with an, what they call an Operation Service Medal for my work in Afghanistan. And that was for, the bottom picture is a jolly that I went on when I went to see the RAF, and they said, would you like a ride on our Hawk jet? And I said, okay then. So it was okay for 10 minutes. After that, I needed to take my sick bag out because the G-force was just not for me. But the role of the military chaplain. These are the three main roles. I think this is a personal perspective rather than an organizational perspective or a departmental perspective. This is the role which I feel that I've been carrying out. And I don't think it's very different, but this is the role that I've been carrying out. I mean, the main thing that I want to explain to you when I was talking about me being civilian is that because I had to be a chaplain for the whole of the armed forces, not just the Army, Navy or Air Force. Usually a chaplain either goes into one of these three services, he wears the uniform of that service and then serves in one particular unit. Whereas there are about 600 to 800 Muslims in the armed forces. They are spread out across, thinly across the British Isles and beyond. And I was supposed to serve as a chaplain for all of them wherever they are. And so it was easier for them to make me civilian rather than make me military. And actually, though I'm a strong advocate of future imams being in uniform, I think the fact that this post was civilian was absolutely crucial. Because had I come in uniform, I would have come in as a captain at the bottom of the pile, and I would have been told, don't do that, or do this, and I would have to say yes, sir. So the fact that I wasn't uniformed in the first place at this pioneering stage, I think was absolutely crucial, because it gave me flexibility. I didn't have to get subsumed by the military structure, and it gave me access with which other chaplains who come in new into the military don't have. Actually, even after you become a full colonel, even if you become a 1-star, without there being certain boundaries or obstacles to overcome before you get access, whereas as you can see from the picture, I just knock on the head of the armed forces door and say, can I have 5 minutes? And that's firstly because I'm the only imam to the armed forces, and secondly because I'm civilian. So whereas if I'd come in military, I wouldn't have been able to. Regardless of if you're in uniform or not, you're non-combatant. So military chaplains in the UK don't carry weapons, not even for self-defense. And they, according to the Geneva Convention, have a special status. So they cannot be targeted, and they shouldn't be killed in a sense. So these are the three obviously main roles, providing spiritual and religious service to the people who are under your care. That could be spiritual questions, it could be religious services, it could be religious training, it could be religious questions, etc., etc. You are available for them at any time. And so one of the ways I do that is I hold that annual conference where I get people together at least once a year, because otherwise I never get them as a group. Then you have the moral responsibility, and those people who are serving in the military are expected to have a much greater awareness of morality and ethics, because they will be in the front line and they will have to sometimes have the upper hand and sometimes have to make decisions on the spot. So it's expected of soldiers to have a greater sense of morality, and therefore chaplains have a responsibility to support the personnel in delivering moral training, and in a sense making them God conscious, because the last thing we want these guys to be doing is something which is immoral and ungodly up to a certain extent. And then you have the pastoral role. The pastoral role at peacetime could be anything that any chaplain does in any other sector. But when it's time of war, then there are three main areas that one will have to concentrate on. One is pre-deployment, during deployment, and post-deployment, and all three aspects bring about different challenges. So pre-deployment could bring about things like separation from family, how the family will cope in the person's absence, financial stability, writing wills, the fear of never meeting each other again, moral and ethical questions, and just the fear of going into an operational environment. During deployment, the biggest fear people have is not about being killed, and this is really interesting. And I find that soldiers, most of them in general, have a much greater awareness of issues of life and of spirituality. And I've come across soldiers, and when they say to me, I'm really scared about deploying, I'm really scared, and I think they're going to say, oh, I don't want to get killed, I don't want to leave my family. But one of the things they say is really interesting. It's not that I'm scared of getting killed, I'm scared of killing someone unjustly. So soldiers do have, and are expected to operate at a much higher moral level than I guess the general public will be. But during deployment, the issue of killing and being killed, being injured, comrades and friends being killed or injured, stress, trauma, family problems and illnesses and bereavements at home, feeling homesick, reflection on life, practicing religion at the time of war. Post-deployment, reconnecting with family. Sometimes you've been away for 6 months and you've seen some of the most horrendous things that one would ever see. How do you reconnect with your family? How do you normalize yourself? post-traumatic stress, combat stress, flashbacks, guilt, in need of forgiveness, loss of spirituality and moral compass, self-harm, and some of the worst issues could lead to worse potentially. But these are some of the issues. Educational, I think I've explained that to you. In my capacity, I've trained thousands of military personnel in the UK before they deploy, particularly to Muslim countries. And I think that has definitely helped in building bridges and dialogue on the ground in the war zone. Advisory, as I've explained to you, it could be advice to the chain of command, it could be advice to personnel, it could be advising the MOD on developing policy around how best to cater for the needs of people of all faiths. And as I explained, the time that I spent in Afghanistan, where I was advising quite high-level commanders on this particular issue of religion and how to engage with it to bring about peace and stability in Afghanistan. And I believe personally that that particular role saved lives. I've had a lot of opposition to the work that I've been doing out there, but I think that particular role, I believe, has saved lives in Afghanistan. As you can see, they love to get together because they're all spread out across the country. They're spread out thinly. It's not easy to be the only Muslim in your unit, and therefore, when they get an opportunity to get together, they jump at it, and I try to provide as many opportunities as I can. So these are the numbers of Muslims in the armed forces. This includes reservists and territorial army. There's 820 Muslims, 700 of them are in the army, 70 in the RAF, and 50 in the Navy, only 1 in the Royal Marines. There is a good representation within the officer ranks. The Muslims in the RAF, 15% of them are commissioned officers. In the Army, I don't think the number is as big as that, but there is a good number. In the Navy, the most senior Muslim serving in the military at the moment is a 2-star, which is a very, very senior level to be serving at, and that is a Rear Admiral, and he's in the Navy. So Muslims in the military have served in all operations, be it Falklands, be it Bosnia, be it Libya, be it Afghanistan, be it Iraq. I haven't come across any Muslim who has said, look, I'm not going to serve. There's been 1 or 2 stories in the media, but I think they were before me. As far as I'm concerned, I haven't come across anybody who's in the military and hasn't deployed when they've been told to do so. And why do they join? They join because they want a job, they want a career, they're attracted to the uniform, they want to handle weapons. These are all the reasons why they join the military. There's basic reasons as to why anybody would choose a career. There are some people who join because they're desperate. A lot of people in the armed forces come from deprived backgrounds. Literacy rate is very, very low among some of the junior soldiers. And the army gives them a family, gives them a home, and gives them a purpose. So a lot of people join because of those reasons. But once they join, they're in the armed forces, they've signed on the dotted line, and they do what they've been asked to do. This is, I'm not showing off now, but I went to 10 Downing Street, like many people do, and up there in the top left-hand corner is the family of Gibrans Hashmi, and he's the first and only Muslim soldier who was killed in Afghanistan in 2006. And this is one of the most toughest times that I've had in my 10 years of work in chaplaincy. The NHS, I did 3 years in the NHS, 3 years in the prison service, but supporting this family was one of the hardest tasks that I've really come across, not just in chaplaincy but in my life. I won't say too much about that, but this is one of the roles that a chaplain will have to carry out. And there at the bottom you can see there are women. I guess someone might have asked, are there Muslim women serving in the military? Yes, they are, and they're quite good looking too. Right. So, working for the military, getting down to some of the more juicy issues, I guess. Working for the military, I mean, I don't work for the military. I'm not in uniform. I work for the military, but I'm not in uniform. But I am the only imam who's been able to see the military from the inside, very close up. And I think the military is hugely misunderstood. And I think working in the military really depends on how you see the military and how you understand what the military stands for and what it's there to do. Leaving to the side for the time being the actual things that they are asked to do, because there is a difference between those two things, in my opinion. So, firstly, one view is that the military is Britain's defence capability, and therefore it's my defence capability and your defence capability. It's there to defend UK. It's there to protect the UK and to protect the people within it. And therefore, Britain's defence capability is as important to the UK as is the NHS, as is the police force, as is the fire service, and as is the civil service. It's integral to the existence of the UK. And so if someone serves in the British military to fulfill that role in protecting the UK and its people and being the UK's defence capability, then I think, the view is an admirable thing to do, to serve in the military, to be able to protect people and to be able to hopefully uphold justice and remove anything that harms anyone. And the key thing really is that Islam is not against war. Islam is not a pacifist religion. It allows Muslims to bear arms under strict and stringent conditions and under certain circumstances. And so the idea that Muslims can't join a military, I think is not is flawed in a sense, because the Quran, the Sunnah, the Prophet's life shows that Muslims have borne arms and they do bear arms, and Islam has given Muslims permission to build a defense capability when the need arises. The key thing is not about joining the military or not, is upon what principles then this particular body or this particular organization is deployed. And that's, I think, an important thing to bear in mind. The ethics and the principles upon which this organization operates. Now the thing is, if we're comfortable with the UK and its government generally, then we should be comfortable with the armed forces, because the armed forces is the tool of the government, which is our government. And we work within a certain certain boundaries. We have the Geneva Convention, we have the international law, and we have the just war theory, which I will come onto in a little while. But people say to me, but Muslims can't serve in the military because Muslims will have to fight against other Muslims. Well, a number of questions arise from that. And one of the questions and presumptions that arise from that is Muslim life in Islam more valuable than a non-Muslim life? If the sole question here is that a Muslim cannot fight another Muslim or kill another Muslim, is non-Muslim life more valuable than a Muslim life more valuable than a non-Muslim life? And my understanding of Islam is that no, all life in Islam is sacred. And so if on the basis of ethical and moral principles the British Armed Forces is asked to deploy in a particular place, then it will deploy based on those ethical and moral principles. And the UK doesn't deploy its military based upon faith. It doesn't say, okay, these guys are Muslims, so we're going to go and fight that particular country, or we're going to fight those particular people because they have a particular color or race. But the UK deploys its force, and I keep saying that because the military does not choose where it goes to fight. So I like to emphasize that, and that's where it's hugely misunderstood. It's the government that chooses where the military goes to fight. The question is the only reason why a Muslim cannot serve in the British military because he might have to kill other Muslims? Well, the question is, have Muslims never killed Muslims before? Well, you know, early Muslims did fight against each other, and they fought against each other because they felt God was on their side. Each of the two parties felt God was on their side because they fought based on certain principles which they believe to be true. And so Muslims have fought against other Muslims. So the idea that Muslims never kill other Muslims under any circumstance is not true. Actually, upon some principles, it becomes necessary for Muslims to kill other Muslims. So that's one thing. The other thing is, if we're saying that Muslims can't serve in the British military, then what we're saying is Muslims can only serve in a Muslim military. Okay, so the question then arises, can a Muslim serve in an unjust Muslim military rather than a just non-Muslim military? And I think the answer to that would be, we don't want to serve in an unjust Muslim military, we want to serve in a just Muslim military. So the issue here is not about if it's a Christian military or it's a British military. The issue is about what governs this particular organization, what governs this particular machine, what governs this particular institution. The other question that arises sometimes when I'm having this discussion is, okay, say Britain was invaded. Let's just use the French again. Hope nobody's French over here. They tried it once, they didn't succeed. I don't think they're going to try it again. But and the invading forces come at one end of your street, and the British forces come at the other end of the street. And the invading forces are ransacking all the homes, killing the people, abusing the women and children, and you've got the British military coming and saving all the other people. And what happens is they end up at your house. Now, what are you going to do? Are you going to come out and say to the British military, look, I'm Muslim, you don't need to protect me? Or you're going to say, excuse me, I'm British, please help me? So I think the question will be, I'm British, please help me, I need you. So you can't say that you need the British military and it operates in it's expected to operate in a particular way, but you can't serve in it because it just doesn't make sense. And what we also need to realize is that the British military is not necessarily a killing machine. Can I have some extra time?
Well, a few minutes certainly.
If you don't mind. Okay, a few minutes. Anyway, I'll speed up. It's not just a killing machine. The military takes part in a number of operations: anti-narcotics, peacekeeping operations, humanitarian operations, and also challenging tyranny and injustice is taking part in all other parts of the world. And these are all principles upon which a Muslim military would also go to war. So, this is what you might call the Western just war theory, which all of you are probably familiar with, but I'm sure Andrew is more familiar with than anybody else. You know, I think they're self-evident, so I won't go through them. I'll just give you a second or two to look at that. You know, in my opinion, these are the principles upon which the British military should, and hopefully is, sent to fight on behalf of the UK. And these are all principles, in my opinion, which are Islamic, if not derived from Islam, if I go a little bit further than that. So the just ad bellum, I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, and that is obviously the before going to war. What is the justification for going to war? And this is the justification in Islam for going to war. And if you compare the one previous, which is the Western one, and the Islamic one, you will actually find that they are both exactly the same, just different words. Discrimination and distinction between combatants and non-combatants, having the right intention, challenging oppression, having a competent leader, being proportionate, etc., etc. And so if this is what governs the UK military, and this is what would govern a Muslim military, then in a sense, what's the problem? Then you have jus in bello, which is once you deploy your military force, how do they actually behave? How do they actually deliver that military force? And again, they're self-evident. You can't just be indiscriminate in who you kill or who you shoot or who you arrest, etc., etc. You need to use proportionality, and unfortunately in current modern warfare, I think to maintain proportionality is quite difficult, but you know, that's a different question and a different topic in itself. It has to be a necessity. You can't just say, oh look, there's a group of people over there, let's just shoot them. I mean, if they shoot, they need to be shooting at you. You need to be engaged to be able to think and fair. And so this is what Abu Bakr said in terms of advising Muslim warriors or fighters or the mujahideen when they actually went to the battlefield. Stop, O people, that I may give you 10 rules for your guidance in the battlefield. Do not commit treachery or deviate from the right path. You must not mutilate dead bodies, neither kill a child, nor a woman, nor an aged man. Bring no harm to the trees, nor burn them with fire, especially those which are fruitful. Slay not any of the enemy. And I think that's talking about prisoners. And so again, if you look at these two, you find that they are absolutely same. And there again, you have some of the more rules of engagement that have been identified from the Quran, the Hadith and Islamic theology. And again, you will find that they are, if not the same, more stricter up to a certain extent than the ones that we've seen in just in bello from a Western perspective. I think they're actually the same. I think Muslims just like to say it in a longer fashion. Right? I hope that is thingy. Okay. So Tim Winters made one comment in an article which I was just reading recently, and he said, in its historical evolution, therefore, Islam has not had difficulty with the category of a warrior saint, provided that the warrior is indeed striving to be such. War is no different from any other potentially problematic area of human responsibility, such as sexuality or the ownership of property, in that it ensnares the egotist but can uplift the unselfish. To object to the saints who bear arms is, to the extent that they are what they claim to be, no more theologically coherent than to object to the existence of majesty as well as beauty in God's world. So, very clearly mentioning that you can be a warrior and you can be pious and you can be good. Andrew's put his pen away. So, UK's defence vision. Defending the United Kingdom and its interests, strengthening international peace and stability. The British Army. The British Army exists to defend the nation and serve its interests, and there you have how it operates. These are the moral values and standards which the military is expected every soldier is expected to live and abide by. And actually every year they are trained on these particular aspects, and they are expected to abide by these in peacetime and in wartime. And I can't see anything un-Islamic about those. Now, just quickly going over to some Quranic verses, and this is it. I should be finishing then. Give me 5 minutes because the computer wasn't working 5 minutes.
I think you might have had that 5 minutes.
But I'll let you read these verses yourself, because what it says is that these verses could govern how Muslim soldiers live and work within the British Armed Forces, or in a military which is not Islamic, but has good moral values and standards, and operates under very universal principles. So over here the Quran is actually saying, and why should you not fight in the cause of Allah and of those who being weak are ill-treated and oppressed, men, women and children, whose cry is, our Lord, rescue us from this town whose people are oppressors, and raise for us from thee one who will protect, and raise for us from thee one who will help. Again, it's actually calling for a fighting power which will support. I mean, for the greater good, I think Islam has allowed people to bear arms, but it has to be done within particular principles, and I think the British military up to a certain extent exemplifies those. Again, that's another verse which is a very familiar verse. This is another one in which is and had there not been Allah's repelling some people by others, certainly there would have been pulled down cloisters and churches and synagogues and mosques in which Allah's name is much remembered. So this verse very clearly is talking about protection of not just Muslims but all people through war. And then over here, this verse was quite interesting, where it says, if two parties among the believers fall into quarrel, make ye peace between them, but if one of them transgresses beyond bounds against the other, then fight ye all against the one that transgresses. And over here is quite interesting, because it doesn't talk about war against non-Muslims, it talks about war amongst Muslims. And so if there is someone who, as I said previously, if there is a Muslim community which is transgressing the laws of God, or laws of Allah, or the laws of the land up to a certain extent, as long as they are ethical, then one would be required to also bear arms against that community. So I've got no choice but to stop there.
Thank you very much.